After a quiet Easter long weekend last week, there are 2,414 homes scheduled to be auctioned this weekend. New South Wales will hold about 1,050 auctions, with about 900 in Sydney. Victoria will hold about 890 auctions, with most of them in Melbourne. Queensland will hold about 250 auctions, with about half of them in Brisbane. South Australia will hold about 140 auctions, with most of them in Adelaide. Western Australia, Tasmania and the NT will hold about 17 auctions between them, and the ACT will hold 81 auctions. Taking a look at the most viewed properties going to auction this weekend, and in New South Wales, top property is 133 Burdett Street, Wahroonga. This four-bedder home has a north-facing backyard, sits on 850 square metres. Top property in Victoria, 23 Sarah Place, Hampton Park. This four-bedder has two bathrooms and a modern renovation. Asking price is upwards of $550,000. Top property in Queensland is 39 Armentiers Street, Kedron. This three-bedder is a few clicks north of the Brisbane CBD. The house has a large veranda and a decent-sized backyard. Top property in South Australia is 114 Caulfield Avenue, Clarence Gardens. This retro 1950s home has 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms and some large living areas. And the top property in Western Australia is 13 Manor Approach, Baldivis. This large property is about 45 k's south of Perth. It sits on 3,000 square metres, has 4 bedrooms, a pool and space for 8 cars. And the most viewed property on the REA Group website this week is not a home. It's being billed as an entire village. The address is 1983 Porringarup Road, Porringarup. That's about 50 k's north of Albany in WA, or almost 400 kilometres southeast of Perth. The historic Calibank Village is apparently the oldest continuously run guest establishment in Western Australia. The property is about 12.5 hectares or 32 acres. The main dining hall is now a tavern, restaurant, commercial kitchen and lounge area. The property also has 10 family chalets, 4 historic cottages and 5 ensuite rooms as holiday accommodation. There's also a renovated 3-bedroom manager's residence plus a block of 7 dormitory rooms. There are plenty of other buildings on the site, as you can see, including old cottages that could be updated. Asking price for an entire village, about $2.5 million. Well, for more on property, I'm now joined by Flaherty at REA Group. And thanks for your time. Seems like the market is bouncing back after a pretty quiet Easter long weekend.
Yeah, that's right. We've actually seen a pretty high number of properties coming up for sale this weekend at auction. Of course, it's not as many as we saw in that pre-Easter boom, which is typically one of the most popular weekends of the year to sell a property. But it is encouraging to see that there's a lot of stock out there hitting the market.
Yeah, and how have clearance rates been going for the past few weeks or so?
Well, we have seen clearance rates decrease a little bit over the past few weeks, but they are actually holding above what we were seeing over the last 6 months of last year. So we're seeing clearance rates in and around the low 60% across most of our capital cities.
All right, look, we're now roughly 4 years since the pandemic. You've done some research tracking national property prices over that period. I mean, how much have property prices lifted over those 4 years?
Well, if we look at how much prices have grown over just 4 years, the growth is absolutely staggering, especially if you consider that most of that growth happened over that 2020 to 2021 period. So overall prices are now sitting 40% higher, which for the average homeowner equates to an increase in equity of about $220,000.
Wow, so that's obviously the national average, but were there some parts of Australia that fared a bit better than others?
Yeah, definitely. Look, price growth was mixed across the country. Queensland really was the top performer. If we look at the regions that saw the strongest growth over that time, 4 of the nation's top 5 regions are all located in Queensland. So Wide Bay was actually the best performer. Ipswich was also really strong. And then, of course, the Gold Coast performed really, really well in terms of price growth.
And what do you think the reason for that is? Yeah, Wide Bay, property prices up 81% over 4 years. What's the big interest in moving to Wide Bay or buying property in Wide Bay?
Look, I think that we were seeing the trend of the grey nomads heading up to Queensland before the pandemic. And of course, we've also seen even younger families moving into Queensland, particularly from New South Wales, where property prices are very high. But that trend absolutely accelerated during the pandemic. And even though it's slowed down since, that trend hasn't really gone away. We are continuing to see a lot of migration from the southern states into Queensland, and even migration away from the greater Brisbane area into the wider regional Queensland area.
And also, just looking at the report, what happened with Melbourne's result? It seems to have lagged the other capital cities a bit over that 4 years.
Yeah, well, unfortunately for homeowners in Melbourne, they have not experienced the same level of capital growth that the other cities have. So over the 4 years, Melbourne's property prices have increased by 17%, which is well below that 40% that was experienced on a national level.
All right, now look, this week obviously you released the home price index for the month of March. How did prices track during March?
Look, we saw property prices up in most capital cities over March. Nationally, we've hit another new record high for prices. Interestingly, we've actually seen Melbourne make a bit of a comeback, particularly when it comes to unit prices. As I said, Melbourne was the underperforming city over those COVID years. The population actually shrunk. Now we're really seeing the reverse. So in terms of people on the ground, Melbourne is now growing faster than any other capital city. And I think this is starting to flow in demand for properties, and that's starting to have an impact on prices.
And obviously there's a lot of stock available in Melbourne each week when we look at the numbers. But where do prices go from here?
Look, we actually think that prices will continue to grow. One of the things we've seen is that even though there's been a really significant year-on-year rise in the total number of homes hitting the market, buyer demand has increased with that supply. So even though there's more choice for buyers, there's actually more buyers out there looking. And I think that people are feeling much more confident. People are feeling more optimistic that interest rates are not going to rise any further from where they've been. They may even decrease over the next 12 to 18 months. So that's removed a lot of that uncertainty around how much higher someone's repayments may be down the track. And I think that's what's prompting a lot of buyers to get in.
And Flaherty from REA Group, thanks for joining us on the program this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.